Greetings folks, and welcome to another 81632-bit. I'm your host Rob, and today we're taking a look at the misadventures, shall we say, that Commodore had when trying to get onto the CD-ROM multimedia bandwagon back in the early 90s. Now, Commodore had two bites of the cherry when it came to getting onto the CD-ROM bandwagon. Initially there was the CDTV, which stood for Commodore Dynamic something or other, not compact disc television. It was the Commodore Dynamic Total Vision, apparently that was its full name, and the later CD32. Now, interesting fact here, both of these attempts by Commodore to crack the CD-ROM market happened within 2 or so years of each other. Now, we're going to take a look at both systems in chronological order. So, without further ado, let's start off with the CDTV. So, the CDTV, the Commodore Dynamic Total Vision. This was Commodore's initial attempt to enter the then new multimedia CD-ROM market, and it was released to people in March and April of 1991, having been previously shown at trade shows over the previous couple of years. Now, in terms of what the CDTV was, well, basically it was an Amiga 500 with 1 meg of RAM plus a single speed CD-ROM drive placed into a casing, which made it look very much like a hi-fi component or a VCR of the day. Now, obviously this big drive for this new multimedia market was focused around having these multimedia systems in people's living rooms as opposed to in offices or bedrooms, which is basically where computers had been up until that point. Now, the CDTV was quite interesting. As I said, it was basically an Amiga 500 with a meg of RAM and a CD-ROM drive. It ran on Amiga OS 1.3, which was actually a revision behind Amiga OS 2.0, which was shipping with the A500 at the time. It came with an infrared remote control joypad control thing, which wasn't ergonomically brilliant and wasn't exactly brilliant to use, but you know, you could buy a number of add-ons for it to turn the system into an A500. These included obviously a keyboard, a floppy drive add-on, a mouse, either an infrared one or a plugged-in one. So you could essentially turn the CDTV into a fully functional A500, although this came at a cost. The CDTV, when it was released, hit the market at approximately £499 or $999 in the US, but once you added in the keyboard, the floppy drive, the mouse, you were paying almost double what you would have paid really for an Amiga 500. And if the truth be told, a lot of the software that came out for the CDTV just wasn't worth the investment. Of the 63 total pieces of software released for the machine, only 23 of them were true exclusive games for the system, and that's the key point. A system in the lounge at the time was seen as a games system, and most of the rest of them were just enhanced versions of existing Amiga games with CD audio soundtracks, and some of them were literally just Amiga titles slapped onto a CD-ROM. Now, like I said, this wasn't good for the market. It wasn't a way of selling the system, and it didn't. There are no accurate figures for the sales of the CDTV worldwide, but it is widely accepted that under 100,000 systems were sold. Now, it did have competition. The CDTV was not on its own here in the market. Its main competition was the Philips CDI, which, despite not exactly being a monster success itself, was significantly more successful as both a multimedia system for people's lounges and a games machine. Now, there was one other competition which many people haven't really heard of, which was the Tandy Video Information System, which well, when you stack that up next to the CDTV, makes the CDTV look like a roaring success. But that's a subject for another video another time. But yeah, I think it's safe to say, and this is my opinion, but looking at all the things you can find on the internet and the various articles, I think it's safe to say that the Amiga CD-TV failed because it was vastly overpriced compared to, say, buying an Amiga, and it just didn't have enough unique pieces of software. There was no killer app that made people go, I have to have one of these, I have to go out and buy a CD-TV for my living room, this is so cool. It just didn't have that despite Commodore's best efforts. So yeah, it was a flop, like huge. But, you know, Commodore tried, and by 1993 they were willing to try again with the CD32. Now, the CD32 was a whole different kettle of fish. This machine was intended to be a games system. The whole notion of it being a sort of home multimedia hub didn't really apply. Released in September of 1993 and discontinued incredibly soon thereafter in April of 1994 due to Commodore essentially going bankrupt, the CD32 was a then top-end Amiga 1200 based system with 2-speed CD-ROM. Now, strangely enough, for a very brief period after its release, the CD32 was actually the best-selling CD-ROM system in the UK, outselling Sega's already established Mega CD add-on for the Mega Drive. But again, the world conspired against the CD32 in effect. Yes, it was an A1200, which was, at the time, the most powerful Amiga on the market. It was a 32-bit system. It used the AGA chipset, which gave you enhanced colour depth and higher resolutions. But realistically, it was still just an Amiga with a CD-ROM, and quite frankly, one of the most bizarre and god-awful joypads ever conceived. Even worse, compared to the CD-TV, there were only 7 genuinely exclusive titles to the CD32 that you couldn't run on an A1200 or an Amiga 500. The remainder of its software library was just A500 and A1200 games plonked onto CD. Some had extra FMV sequences, some had CD audio soundtracks, and, much like with the CD-TV, some were just the core game dumped onto a CD. Now, unlike the CD-TV, Commodore never officially put out a bunch of peripherals to allow you to turn the CD32 into a A1200, although third parties over the years have produced various bits of kit to allow you to turn the CD32 into an A1200, and that was probably a smart decision actually on Commodore's part. That positioned this machine as a genuine console, not just a slightly fancier version of their bog standard product at the time. Now, the CD32 did do better than the CD-TV. It's known that in that brief sort of 6-7 month period it was available on the market, it did shift over 100,000 units across the European market, having never been released in North America. And the price was much more reasonable, a launch price of £399, which, you know, that fared favourably when you put it up against the A1200, which was in a similar price point. And if you're looking at it as a CD-ROM based game system, it certainly put it into a similar pricing ballpark as a Mega Drive with a Mega CD add-on. Although, how well the CD32 would have fared a few months down the line once systems like the 3DO started to hit the market, we'll never know. But again, Commodore tried with this one, and they did try harder. This was a genuine attempt at a home console, but it was again hamstrung by being based on Amiga hardware, which even with the A1200 by that point was starting to look quite long in the tooth, being the best part of a decade old at its core. It had very few exclusive titles. There was no real killer app that made you go out there and go, oh my god, I have to buy this system. And Commodore's own financial woes scuppered any chance of any kind of long-term sales or success, with Commodore essentially ceasing to exist 6 months after the machine hit the market, which, yeah, that killed the machine dead, because any inventory that was held in warehouses was seized. They couldn't produce new hardware and ship it to wholesalers and retailers, so the system literally just died. It was on the shelves and then it was gone. It never hit the North American market, it never hit the Japanese market, so it never had a chance to spread its wings. Now, it's really, really unfortunate, but very indicative of how Commodore were run through the 1990s, that Commodore launched 2 CD-ROM based systems, both of which failed for largely similar reasons, and they didn't seem to learn the lesson the first time round with the CDTV. Now, they are underrated machines, especially the CD32. I genuinely don't think we saw what developers could do with the system. Much like the Amiga 1200, it was hamstrung by Commodore going bust and some shifts in the market dynamics towards more 3D graphics, which, even with its extra power, the CD32 would have definitely struggled to have kept up with things like the Jaguar and the 3DO, let alone the PlayStation and Saturn. But those are my thoughts on these machines. They failed because the market either wasn't ready for something at that price, i.e. the CD-TV, or the manufacturer Commodore hadn't learned the lessons from that and hamstrung themselves by trying to launch a product whilst in dire financial straits. Now, if you've got an opinion on this, please feel free to tell me in the comments down below. Don't forget as well, you can like this video if you've really enjoyed the video. Please hit that subscribe button as well. You can also share the video with your friends. There's a share button down there. You can share it on your socials. That's awesome. Ring the bell to be notified when I upload a new video. There's also YouTube memberships and Patreon memberships. The links are in the description beneath us. So, if you want to sign up for them, please do. Big shout out to my regular subscribers here, Scott Retro and Leftback. You guys are much loved. I do have a new YouTube subscriber, and I'm just going to stick their name up on screen here because I've forgotten and I'm an idiot. So yeah, I've been Rob. This has been 81632-bit, and I will see you on the next video. Bye for now.